didn't get a chance to put. I didn't get a chance to put in the presentation yet from this past December, but I will show that if we have time. Okay, so the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is what the federal law that we operate under, requires an annual count of children every year. So it's if there's flexibility there, the state can choose to do it between October 1st and December 1st. And Indiana code, there you see the citation 204344, sets it as December 1st as for us. There's an additional count. It's in the same statute that sets an additional account that we are just finishing up now every April 1st. But that one is not used for federal reporting purposes, and we don't really use that much in our monitoring. That one is used more for forecasting for the state budget, things, looking at how the growth of students with disabilities happens over the course of the school year. The April count is usually always higher than the December count, which makes sense if you think about it. There's a lot of 3-year-olds becoming eligible. There's a lot of new students identified, and we have not lost the students that graduate or exit that we will be losing here in the next couple of months. So the April count is usually always higher. The child count is for children ages 3 to 22. So federal law provides IDEA funding for ages 3 to 21, but Indiana extends special education rights and entitlements to age 22. And we are counting 4 different types of plans right now under Indiana law. So the first 2 of these are the federally required ones, which are students serving students under IEPs. That obviously is the vast majority of the students in the child count. That would be students attending public schools, including charter schools. The next group is our service plan students. So those students are students that are attending a non-public school or are homeschooled, but are receiving services, special education services, from a public school corporation. And since those are based off of the location of the school, that is only our traditional public school corporations, the 290 that have boundaries across the state. And then we have our 2 choice programs, one of which is administered by the Department of Education and the other by the state treasurer. And in both these programs, children can receive services from under a service plan, the traditional public school corporation route, or they can select the non-public school to do those services. Even if they're in the choice program, they can do either one of these. And then the non-public school will provide the services, or they can choose themselves as the parent, and that APC equivalent money, although it's from a different line in the state budget, will be put into their ESA account. So we count all of these. We don't report the last 2 to the federal government, but they are included for purposes of proportionate share. So if anybody has any questions about how those programs intersect, it can get rather complicated. But the basic thing to know is the student is being served under one of these 4 plans. So what do we collect? We collect this is the core data that we collect at the time of the child count, sometimes called the special education count, or SE. The school that the child's responsibility lies with, disability categories that they've been identified with, their education environment, which is also known as the least restrictive environment, though each one of those are individualized, but they're put in categories for purposes of reporting. If they have been in a specialized situation, so if a child has been put at oftentimes we'll see a child put at an alternative to incarceration, a treatment facility. We do want to know that because that restricts their setting based on that legal order. And the case conference really can't determine the education environment in that case. So we also collect that information. But the education environment will be reflective of that setting. And then we also, of course, collect the dates of receiving services. In the past, this data used to be just submitted at the time of the child count, December 1. But now this data, due to our modernization efforts over now several years, the data flows on an ongoing basis into a centralized system known as data exchange. And so we're getting all the data all the time. And obviously we need the dates to see who's active as of December 1st, which is that snapshot, which determines funding, a lot of monitoring and things like that. Okay, so those are the core things that we collect at the time of the child count, but that isn't really all of the child count, because there's a lot of other information that we need to complete what we would call the child count data set. And we get those from other places in our data reporting. So obviously, the basic demographics information, birth date, race or ethnicity, child sex, free reduced lunch status, the corporation of legal settlement, which is the corporation, public school corporation in whose boundaries the child lives. So where your house is, not necessarily where you're attending. There's lots of reports and things needed for that. And then there's lots of other data. The Department of Education has a lot of data coming through it. So we have over 1 million students enrolled across the state, public and private. I think it's about 1.1 million. That's just the number of students. And then think about all of the various data that we collect on those students from the local school districts as required by federal and state law. You're talking about hundreds of millions of pieces of individual data per year. So there's a lot of data flowing in from all of the school systems and non-public schools across the state. And then it gets organized and we generate our child count data based off of a combination of the core data and then this additional data. All right, as I mentioned, data exchange is the central hub. So each school has connected their local student information system, their student data system, things like PowerSchool, Harmony, Skyward, Infinite Campus are the 4 biggest ones, but there are several more that flow all that information into a central hub. This is about to change, so I'll get to that in a second. Data is validated within this system. So what we want to make sure that the data that we have is the best possible quality. We have 425 public school corporations plus a couple hundred non-public schools, or several hundred maybe, that are reporting data. We want to make sure that this data passes muster, that it has a certain, that it doesn't conflict with other schools or with itself. So what kind of validations are done? Well, the biggest one obviously is if more than one school is reporting a student. We want to make sure that the student has an active enrollment record, that the student is being reported as enrolled, because that's also reporting that's required for each school and state accredited non-public school. We make sure that the educational environment reflects the child's age. So preschool students, because their environments are different than public school, there's a different set of rules for how we group those educational environments. So if you're putting in a school-based educational environment for a 4-year-old, that record is going to fail. So that's a kind of an internal validation that we do. We make sure that non-public students have been evaluated properly and are identified properly so that we know what students are being served that are parentally placed non-public students, because that's very important, especially for fiscal purposes, to make sure that dollars are being spent properly, and to keep up with some IDEA required data reporting that we kind of do on behalf of the schools. And then we also track changes from the previous year. So if we have a school system, we don't have as resources to go into this quite as deep as I'd like to. But our other data specialists and I have been working on trying to get ahead of this a little bit more, so that if a school system has a big change in data from one year to the next, maybe a big increase, big decrease, big change in one of the subcategories that I've discussed, we can reach out to them and say, well, you've got a big change. Is this really a change? And have you thought about why that change might be happening? Or is there an error in the data reporting something? Okay, so as I was saying earlier, this system is going to remain the same. Data will still flow into data exchange and go through these validation checks and then be certified by the schools. So that's going to be the same. What's going to be different is, some of you may be aware, we have a statewide IEP system, which means we have a statewide system that's provided to public schools at no charge to develop IEP documents, record student progress, all those things that go around the entire IEP process, from evaluation to identification to implementing the IEP and documenting progress. So all of those things are going into our current IEP system. We are changing the contract from PCG, which is the current vendor, to PowerSchool. So PowerSchool is mainly known as a student information system, where you might log in to get your students' grades or do things like that. When I was a teacher, we used that to record student attendance, student grades, those sorts of things. But they also have another product called Special Programs that we will be changing our statewide IEP system, once again provided to the public schools at no charge. And they will then use that system to develop and track their IEPs. Well, so that's it's just a different system, but doing exactly the same thing. What's new is that this system will now provide the special education specific data that I was discussing. I'll go back to that, to our data exchange system. So rather it coming from the school's local student information system, we're going to get it directly out of the statewide system. And it will then go into data exchange and go through all those validations. There also will be more validations built in to this PowerSchool special program. So at the end of the day, very little is changing. It's just the process by which that data gets in will be changing from a source of each individualized local student information system to this centralized system. One thing that should be better is that right now we have to transfer that data in a sort of manual process across different kinds of systems, different processes across the state. And we see, not so much in the child count, but especially in the evaluation data, we see some quality problems. So we're hoping that will help address this, having a centralized data source. But all this data will still be, of course, available to the people who need it at the local schools. All right, so let's go into the child count uses. Everybody's still there, right, Lisa?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Just want to make sure, because I can't see anything, so I.
Nope, absolutely. And I'm watching the chat for any questions, and Jill's watching Facebook for any questions.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. I'm looking at the slides, so I can't see the interface, because I don't want to be looking off to the side at the slides. So, okay, so what are we using this data for? As I mentioned, there's sort of three primary use categories that we are using the data for on an annual or ongoing basis. One of those is state and federal reporting. This is kind of the core. This is, there's various reports required at the state and federal level that we prepare based off of this count to track how many students there are identified, how many students are identified in each category, and so on and so forth. Okay, fiscal. That's the one who gets a lot of people's attention. In state funding for special education, this is special education specific money that is allocated to pay for the special ed services, is getting close to $850 million at the state level. And so that's obviously that is based off of this December 1 child count. Additionally, we have our IDEA federal Part B grants, of which there are two for each school system. One that is for all ages, and one that's targeted, much smaller one that's targeted to supplement for preschool programs. So that right now is about $300 million. So if you just look at the money coming either through the Department of Education to the local school systems, we're talking about 1.1 or 1.2 billion dollars of special education funding per year, state and federal. And that state money in particular has gone up quite a bit because the legislature, I don't think they are doing it this year, but in several years up leading to this, there has been substantial increases in per student funding for disabilities. And then our last thing is monitoring. So as the Department of Education, under both federal and state law, Article 7, we are tasked with the general supervision of all special education programs across the state. That means there are certain annual things that we monitor always every year, and then there's additional monitoring that we do on a either cyclical or as needed basis. So the child count is sort of the core of that, because when we're doing monitoring, it's all about getting kids evaluated and implementing IEPs for purpose ensuring free appropriate public education and specially designed instruction. So that is the core of our monitoring, and so the child count is obviously the core data for that, but there's other data as well that we use. So I just went through this. I got ahead of myself. Fiscal year 2024, it was approximately $780 million. It jumped to about $840 million this year. So maybe after the presentation, Lisa, I can update these slides so that people will have the more current figures, because I didn't, when we did this originally, I didn't have the, that hadn't happened yet.
That would be great, Brandon. Thank you.
Okay, so here are the amounts that were paid for this year. And as I said, it was quite an increase in tuition, special education tuition support. And some of that is due to the growth in the severe disabilities. Now, when it says severe disabilities, this is really just a fiscal classification. This doesn't mean that every child in this situation has a severe disability in every sense. It's just in the way it's classified for funding purposes is this. As you can see, APC level 1 and 2 has been split into two different groups. That happened 2 or 3 years ago. But even though it's been split into two different groups, the funding for both groups is exactly the same. So for the severe disabilities, it's $11,659 per child. The last time I checked the state budget, that's just about to, that's being, it's not finished yet, but it's in conference committee, I think right now, between the two branches of the legislature. They had kept this level the same. But as I said, there's been several increases in the last several years. Mild and moderate, 2,930. And then the communication disorder, which is language or speech impairment, $551. And that amount is the same. And if this child has a secondary disability of speech or language, 551 is added to either the 11,000 or the 2,900 here. So that one's a little different. We don't fund for secondary disability unless it is communication disorders, and then that amount is added on. So this is the school age amount. So these are kids that even if they haven't started kindergarten, they've reached kindergarten age August 1st as of last year. So for the children who have not yet reached that age, who turned 5 after August 1st of last year, that is funded differently, and it's a per student amount regardless of disability. It ends up being a higher amount per student than when we divide this out. So preschool is funded overall at a slightly higher level, and that's 3,820. I will say at this level, we see it's dominated really by two disabilities. And that is developmental delay, which can go up to age 8, and speech or language impairment. There are a few others, but over 90% of them are those two. Okay, so federal is a different way of funding. We don't fund at a per student amount at federal. It's a rather complex formula that has been set by the current reauthorization of IDEA, which was in 2004. And it involves the child count, the overall enrollment, and the poverty rate. And at this point, the one that influences it the most is the school's overall enrollment, regardless of the population of students with disabilities. But these other two also do factor into it. Okay, and I just wanted to reiterate one thing, that it's not a per student amount. And also, all of these amounts, that when we talk about these amounts, this does not mean that if you have a child with a disability, this is the amount of money that's going to be spent on them. It could be less, it could be more. The idea behind this is that this is sort of an amount that has been set. When it's all aggregated up for the children who need that, they will get their individual regardless of spending. So as everyone knows, at a case conference meeting, you're not supposed to discuss the cost of anything. That is done after the fact and before the fact with these amounts. Okay, so for proportionate share, the proportionate share has to do with the non-public population that I mentioned earlier. So our non-public population includes, as I said, the students on service plans being served by the public school, as well as the students being served by a private school or through the qualified vendors in the ESA program. And this determines how much of their overall grant. So the funding amount at both the state and federal level is the same for students in a non-public school. Federally, it's always been that way. State, it's been that way in Indiana since I think 2012. It's not something that we're required to do, but that is the General Assembly has chosen to do that. And that proportionate share will be the amount that each school system, this would not apply to the charter schools, have to spend on parentally placed students in a non-public school. So we track that. There is a waiver release process, but it's fairly rarely used. Most schools are able to spend all the money on their students that are parentally placed in a non-public school. That is something that is part of the fiscal monitoring. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have kind of our annual monitoring activities. So if any of you are familiar, we just are actually doing the clarification period for the annual state performance plan, annual performance report. That's a big document that gets published on our website every year, usually late spring, early summer. And there are currently 18 indicators in that about various aspects of this Indiana special education program. That data is statewide aggregated. So the individual child counts produce data for that plan. That's the core of the federal government's monitoring of the state. Indicators 5 and 6, which is education environment, 6, which I put in there twice, so I don't need that again. And also 9 and 10, which have to do with disproportionate representation. Indirectly, we also use this data to identify students with disabilities for our assessment indicator, which is indicator 3. That's the iLearn and SAT data that that is the federally required annual assessments for 3rd through 8th and high schoolers. Also IM for alternate assessment. 8 to find out what our parental survey result, parent survey rate of response is statewide. And then 13, which is transition goal compliance. So students 14 and up have to have transition goals in their IEP. We look at those on a rotational basis to make sure that they are meeting a minimum standard. And if not, the schools are issued findings of noncompliance that then they correct. So it's used in quite a bit of the SPP APR in addition to all that money. There's also a lot of data going into the annual determination. So that's another federal requirement. IDEA requires that a determination be made of each public local education agency every year. We do that through our results-driven accountability system. So this is separate from the federal accountability, which has to do with there's some state flexibility there too, but that's the CSI, TSI, school improvement type of accountability that you may have heard of. The state accountability, what used to be the A through F system, has been on hold, but my understanding is it's coming back in some form, or that's being discussed now. These are not that. They're related to it, but the results-driven accountability is only about students with disabilities, and it's about the performance of the implementation of IDEA. So a lot of data goes into that, compliance data, also student outcome data, education environment data. So the child count feeds a lot of that annual determination. And those are also posted on our website. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of monitoring on an annual basis, but there's also a lot of other things that we need child count data for. So we have a 6-year monitoring cycle that we're working on. It's relatively new in the form that we're doing it, so that we can every 6 years do some level of specialized monitoring for each school system. That's about 70 a year. So that is a lot to do. So we can only do a certain level for certain schools, but we're trying to identify issues that might be outside of the normal annual monitoring that are not only specific to that school district, but things that we can focus on to improve throughout the state. And then there's been a lot of strategic initiatives or other needs. Most of that has been around literacy lately, a lot of attention on iRead, as I'm sure everyone is aware, with the retention requirement coming up for students and the good cause exemption for students with disabilities and so forth. So we use a lot of the data for that as well. We get data requests from public stakeholders as well as the General Assembly. Every legislative session, we're getting requests for data from the Legislative Services Agency usually. Okay, so what I want to do now, real quick, if I could, let me stop sharing for a second. And I will show you the updated counts. So that you're not looking at old data.
That's great and very helpful.
Lisa, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Hello?
Yes, I can see it, Brandon. Yes, we could see it when you had it up before.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh. Well, I can hear you.
We can see it, Brandon. Brandon, can you hear us? Brandon?
Sometimes we have technical difficulties, so we will wait till.
Well, Brandon, we can hear you if you want to go ahead. let me make a sign.
Yes, well, and I've just put it in the chat in case he sees. We can hear you, Brandon, and we can see when you share.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Sorry.
Nope, that's all right.
Sorry. I for some reason I just tried to get it back, but I'm not sure what's going on.
You're
Okay.
good.
I will share that again then.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So as we can see, our child count for the past year was up from 180,000 to 185,000. So if you take a look at this graph here, you can see the increase from 2013 has been substantial, but post-COVID, we've seen an accelerated rate of growth for students with disabilities across the state. That has been primarily driven by very large increases in the other health impairment category, as well as the autism category. And for our preschool change, we've also seen growth. You see this very large decrease in the year from 2019 or 2020 to 2021. That was the COVID year. Preschool really went down, which was sort of to be expected. You had to have students that were 3-4 years old coming in. So we had a lot fewer evaluations that year, which really affected our count in a negative direction, whereas it just flattened out at the school age. And as you can see, it has recovered and was really going up, but it's starting to decrease in the amount that we would expect to go up. So that is increasing at a rate not as high, still higher than pre-COVID, but the amounts that we're seeing are a lot higher in the other category.
Brandon, would you mind sharing? We could see the screen, but it wasn't quite big enough. How many preschool students?
I'm going to get off and come back in because I can't hear you.
Okay.
Lisa, that's a great question. We're talking about preschool. And so, that's a time that people are coming in out of first steps. And so, there's a lot of uncertainty for our parents then. And I know we're talking about numbers right now. And I greatly appreciate Brandon being here and sharing those with us. But, that's an area, like I said, we have new parents coming in. They have no idea what maybe a child count is. They don't know, even what categories, there are in Article 7. So just being in preschool alone can be just so scary.
It can, Jill. And I so appreciate Brandon coming and talking about this, because many times families are asked to give information and they want to know what is occurring with that information. And additionally, it's really helpful to know where that money goes.
Yep.
It's helpful to know what categories are looked at and how that funding works.
Right.
So,
And there's a lot of parents that don't understand. I think you and I have a different understanding of the child count and numbers and the dollars, because we've been doing this for so long. And I had the privilege of being able to sit on a school board, so that even gave me a deeper insight into the financial component to schools. And so, it's amazing to see where that's at. It looks like Brandon can hear us now, so
yes,
we'll go back to him.
wonderful. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Yeah, sorry about that. We have to join Zoom in our web browsers. We don't, the Zoom program, they won't let us download it on our computers, our state IoT. So sometimes it can be a little tricky. So just going back to some of the data trends, and then I'll wrap up. So if I can share my screen again real quick. There we go. Share. we go. So going back to some things, so I showed the obviously the amounts going up. We talked about that. So what do our disabilities look like across the state? You can
Brandon,
see our.
I'm so sorry. It's not showing your screen.
Oh, sorry.
That is all right.
Sorry, this is the technology. How about now? Can you see yourself?
I see myself.
Yes. So now we'll look at the slides.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you.
there we
That's
go.
great. We got
Okay, so our largest disability is specific learning disability. As I mentioned, language and speech impairment is second, or it might even be third now. They have as I said, the largest growth, really even before COVID, has been in other health impairment. So we've seen a lot of growth in that area. Then autism after that, mild intellectual disability. And emotional disability, there's two, it's separated out into two. We have not seen a great deal of growth in emotional disability post-COVID. It has mostly been in other health impairment and autism. So this is what I was just talking about. You can see that specific learning disability kind of took a dip. That was because developmental delay was introduced into the school age count. It used to be only for preschool children, and now it goes up to grade 8. So that kind of changed the data dynamics a little bit. But as you can see, the thing that has been constant is the high growth in other health impairment and autism spectrum disorder. We talked about that. And then, as I mentioned, developmental delay and speech impairment dominate the preschool primary disability categories, with autism third. And then this has continued to go up in recent years. So the rate of students, and there's some different ways to calculate this. So depending on the way it's calculated, you'll see different percentages. Sometimes a little higher than this, sometimes a little lower, depending on how the denominator is used and so forth. But we have seen more of our children identified with disabilities, both pre and post-COVID. And it was exacerbated a little bit by the fact that our enrollment overall went down during COVID, our school enrollment, and has been coming back up. I think it's about back to where it was pre-COVID, but that has also influenced the percentages of our students with disabilities, making it a little higher. Okay, and now I talked about student environments, which is their least restrictive environment category, not the individual least restrictive environment, but the category. So you will see that we have about 4.5% of our percent of our children parentally placed in the private school, but of the remaining group, total 77.7%, and that's about where we are now. We're in the regular classroom for at least 80% of the day. About 8% were partly in the resource room and partly in the general ed classroom. And then the rest of these students are largely separated from their general ed peers, either less than 40% of the day or in a special facility or homebound. At the preschool level, as I mentioned, it's a little more complicated. About 40% of our children there are in a what we would call a special education preschool, a preschool only for children with disabilities. That would include that the school itself is only for children with disabilities, or that there might be other preschool children there, but the students are in different rooms. We have then added up together 45% of children that are in what we call a regular early childhood program. That includes anything from a daycare up to a full instructional preschool. Some of the times the services are inside that classroom, and sometimes they're without that classroom. And then this group is mostly, the provider location is mostly walk-in speech students who only have speech listed as a disability and are only coming to the school. Usually the school, could be somewhere else, but usually it's the school, to get services from the speech therapist. These regular early childhood programs, it should be noted, when we do this for data, it can be kind of confusing for the schools because it includes services outside the IEP, whereas this previous slide does not. It includes only schools in the student environment. This includes services outside the IEP. So if preschool is strange that way, but just keep that in mind. Sometimes we remind schools that even if a child is coming to you for special ed services, if they're going to a daycare another part of the day, they can be in this category here, this orangish brown category. Okay, so here's my contact information. And we have our general special education email there, as well as our OSE data that's covered by Neetu Sinha, our other data specialist, and me. And I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comments that anybody has.
The only thing that we had was that there was a need for clarification on how the dollars were spent on the child. The example was, does each teacher get to spend that money on each child?
No, the way that it's very difficult to track dollars spent on an individual child because our financial reporting is not done in that manner. The financial reporting is obviously, if you have a one-to-one aid, that's very easy to say, okay, whatever the cost of that one-to-one aid is, that dollars are being spent because 100% of that person's time is being utilized to serve that particular child. But for the vast majority of our students, they're working with several people who are working with several children throughout the day. So, these amounts are, like I said, they're not expected to be the full amount that's even spent on average on a child. Local money can also be spent on special education. So it's always very difficult to even say how much money is being spent on education in total. And then to do an average about how much, per student, let alone for a student's individual needs. So the accounting for that is all done at the sort of what it's being spent on, right? Teacher's salary, a certain kind of assistive technology or training or things like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
And
That's the
Brandon,
only thing I had.
I think that you made several good points that we want to touch on. And then I also want to bring back up that QR code to make sure everybody watching live or later can scan that. It's important to know that at the case conference committee, money's not to be a discussion. It's the need of the child. And just as you said, as this money goes into a pot of money for education, sometimes and some years, significantly more money will be spent on that child than is allotted for funding, and sometimes less. But the discussion is, what does this child need to be able to access their FAPE, to be able to progress? And I just think that is an important thing to note, that money's not supposed to be a discussion similar to necessarily staffing issues. We have a document on our website, of course, the parent-to-parent guide, that talks a lot about making the system a little easier for families to understand. Of course, there's Article 7, which is our state law, and Navigating the Course, which is being revised to reflect Article 7. So there are lots of ways for families, including webinars like this, to understand this process, because it can be rather daunting. And I want to thank you for kind of coming on here and helping to explain what is looked at for funding and why it is looked at that way, because many times, just like that question, families do wonder what happens to the money for my child.
Yes, it's an excellent question.
And just out of my own pure curiosity, have you ever had a school that balked on their child count? I mean, I can't imagine anybody would, but there's repercussions I know of if they wouldn't. But has anybody ever, been so blatant if they just didn't want to? I just can't imagine, but I have to ask.
No, I mean, these are all, we've had quality issues, but we've never had a problem getting child count information overall from any of our schools. We have a couple of times had a charter school report zero. That a very small charter school, and that is a possibility under IDEA. You can have zero children with disabilities, but we are making sure in that case that that they're doing their child find as required, and that there's some certain fiscal implications for if you report zero. So we generally do not have. Sometimes we've had some more trouble with evaluation data, but the child count, partly because there is so much money involved, that
Yeah.
tends to be pretty, the quality is pretty high overall, I think.
Well, that's good. Yeah, and usually whenever you're talking about dollars, I would be hard pressed to say that there'd be any schools that would balk on it, but I mean, you just never know. And I never thought about charter schools, but I could see where they would think that it was zero. And sometimes and I know there's a whole host of things that has to be filled out and for them to get those numbers and stuff, but sometimes people just don't think that like even a learning disability is a disability and that it does fall into one of those 13 categories. So I could see where that would come up. Anyway, Lisa, did you have any other questions?
Yes, the other good point that I wanted to make that Brandon had made had to do with a public school, which includes charter schools, and a non-public school, and that those are significantly two different things. And additionally, the fact that Brandon also mentioned child find. That's
Yeah.
something we talk to lots of families about. Is that responsibility for the school to perhaps evaluate or have the discussion if a student isn't being successful. So, Brandon, thank you so much for bringing all this information. And as we finish up, I'm going to go ahead and share this QR code one more time because I don't think it got on in the beginning for the recording. And because we are the Parent Training Center and we're state and federally funded, we do need, whether you're watching it after the fact or now, to have everyone scan that QR code or go to the tiny URL, sign in, take the training survey, receive the that information. And because we are state and federally funded, and we take all of those surveys very seriously because we want to ensure that we're helping the process along. We want to ensure that we're providing good quality assistance to understand the process. And that is exactly why we have individuals like Brandon come on and talk about the child count and how to kind of demystify what goes on in that process. So that is what we have today. And again, Brandon, thank you for joining us. And Jill, my wonderful cohort and webinars. And we're InSource, the Parent Training Center for Indiana. And we hope that today you have enjoyed this webinar presentation. And before we go, Brandon also mentioned the DOE survey, parent survey, indicator 8. So that's another thing we really want to talk about. We even send it out to parents ourselves so that districts can find out some more information about parent voice in their community. But Jill, that's all that I had at this point.
Well, Brandon, I just want to thank you again for being here today. I greatly appreciate it. Please feel free to come back at any time with anything that you would like to come back with. You are always welcome here.
You're welcome. Sometimes I just come to just see what's going on.
Yep. Please do. We would love to have you. And at different
I don't
times
have a lot of time lately. But,
yeah, absolutely.
Especially
We
with
would
this
love
new
to have
IEP system thing. But yeah.
And you bring that up. I am looking
Mhm.
forward to that and seeing that because I'm no longer in the field working, so I don't get the opportunity to see the new IEPs. So I'm looking forward to when that gets rolled out and being able to see that myself.
And
Yes,
Dr.
it's a massive,
Holsapple has
massive
assured
project.
us, yes, has assured us that we will have someone come and speak on it so that parents and community stakeholders can know about it as it's getting ready to be rolled out. So
Okay, well, if there's no more questions and I don't have anything on Facebook, I don't see anything that's popped up on our Zoom platform. So again, Brandon, thank you for spending your time with us today. I really appreciate it. Lisa, thank you as well. And remember, our offices will be closed tomorrow for the holiday. And then we will also, our offices will be closed on Monday and Tuesday because that is our in-service. And so all staff will be meeting in Bloomington. So everyone have a wonderful weekend and we will see you in a couple weeks.
thank you all.
Thanks.